there, my name is Paul Mallet. I'm a data specialist from Skate, Ontario. In this video series, I'll be providing an overview of the configuration, use, and troubleshooting of a JTech video encoding device for use with Skate Canada's Online CSS. In this first video, we'll be reviewing the initial configuration. I'll call this the base configuration for a JTech H.264 IPTV encoder, which is the recommended video encoder for use with Online CSS. The base configuration is only needed if your video encoder has not yet been configured for use with Online CSS. This would likely be the case if you're configuring a new video encoder, an encoder that has been factory reset, or an encoder that is configured for use with another system, such as ISU Cutter. If your encoder device already has the base configuration, and you're just looking for instructions on how to configure it for a rink at a competition, you can skip ahead to the Part 2 video. To get started, we'll first need to make sure that several default settings are in place. To do that, we'll factory reset the device. First, make sure the power cord is connected and your device is plugged in, then insert a paper clip into the reset hole and hold it there for at least 10 seconds. If you've held it long enough, the indicator lights on the front of the device will turn off. Next, use a web browser to access the video encoder's configuration panel. Following a factory reset, the encoder's IP address will change to the default value of 192.168.1.168. To be able to communicate with the encoder, your computer must be networked on the same subnet as the encoder. More specifically, it must have an IP address that begins with 192.168.1.something, where that something is a random value between 2 and 255. Just make sure you don't use the same host address as the encoder, which is 168. For this demonstration, I'm going to assign an IP address with the host number 10. Now, you could potentially connect your computer and encoder device using a properly configured router, but it's easier to simply connect the two devices directly using an Ethernet cable. Unless your computer already has a manually assigned IP address on the 192.168.1 subnet, you'll first need to configure your network adapter. To do this, open Network Settings, click on Change Adapter Options, right-click the Ethernet adapter, and select Properties. Select Internet Protocol version 4, then select Properties. Select Use the following IP address, and then enter the desired host IP address, in this case 192.168.1.10. The subnet mask should be 255.255.255.0, and the default gateway should be the IP address of the video encoder because we're using a direct Ethernet connection to this device instead of connecting through a router. After configuring your network settings, open the video encoder configuration screen using a web browser. Enter 192.168.1.168 in your web browser and press Return. The default user ID and password are both admin. If you have an older JTech ENCH4 encoder, the configuration page may default to Chinese after a factory reset. If this has occurred, change the language setting using the drop-down menu at the top right of the screen. Step 3 of the base configuration procedure is to check your device's firmware version. This is the software installed on the encoder that runs the device. To check the version, click System, and then Upgrade and Backup. The minimum firmware version for compatibility with Online CSS is version 3.02. This particular device meets the firmware requirement, therefore no further action is needed. But for this demonstration, I'll show you how to upgrade the firmware anyway so that you can see how it's done. To download the latest firmware, open jtechdigital.com in a web browser. Under the Resources menu, select Downloads. Click the Firmware button, then scroll down to the device with the product number JTD220. Then download the desired firmware version. As of mid-September 2023, when this video was made, there are 2 versions of the firmware that will work with Online CSS. I'll download the latest version, which is 3.10. When the download is complete, navigate to your download folder and extract the firmware updater from the zip archive. The file you need is called up.rar. Click the Choose File button to select the firmware updater, click the Open button, then click the Upload button. Finally, reboot the device. It'll take about 30 seconds for the device to reboot. After the reboot, check the firmware version again by clicking System, Upgrade and Backup. Next on our list is configuring the video stream. Access the Encoder Mainstream menu. Set GOP to 60, bitrate to 5000, encoded size to same as the input, H.264 level to baseline profile, and bitrate control to strong CBR. Click Apply. Step 5 involves adjusting some additional video settings. Access the Encoder Advanced menu. Ensure Video Only and Audio Only are both disabled, and set TX Muxer to Compatible with FFmpeg. Click Apply. The final step of the base configuration is to adjust the network settings. The JTech device will be connected to the same network that's running Online CSS. That subnet, which fits the recommended scoring subnet used across all Skate Canada sections, is 192.168.6. Therefore, we'll need to make sure that the video encoder is on that same subnet. We'll also be sure to assign a static IP address so that we can easily find the device on the network later on to modify the settings for a particular competition rink without having to factory reset the device again. For this, we'll use the Skate Canada recommended static host number, which is 200. We can make these changes by accessing the System Network screen. Set the IP to 192.168.6.200 and the gateway to 192.168.6.1. Set DNS1 to 8.8.8.8 and set DNS2 to the IP address of the Online CSS network router, which is 192.168.6.1. Enable NTP and set the NTP server time zone to time.nrc.ca. Next, set the UTC offset corresponding to your local time zone. Click Apply, then reboot. This concludes the base configuration steps. Keep in mind that from this point on, the encoder has a new IP address which is no longer on the same subnet as the computer you just used to configure it. So the next time you need to connect to the encoder device to change any settings, you may need to adjust your computer settings so that the network adapter is configured for the 192.168.6 subnet.